3, 2, 1. We should be live.
Welcome to a special Zion's Banner broadcast in conjunction with the Street Apologist. I'm getting used to Vocab's studio. I just have an office. He's got a studio. So I'm really excited about doing this. He had an interview just a while ago that I thought we'd jointly kind of deal with and respond to.
Gotta turn on your volume. Hey, at least we know we can hear each other.
Yeah, we do.
I just have an office. He's got a studio, so I'm really excited.
Just turn on your volume on there. Yeah.
Oh.
And he had an interview just a while ago.
There we go. Okay, sorry about that. A little bit of bleed over. So this is really kind of exciting, but I really wanted to deal with this. This is kind of in my wagon house. My Master of Divinity has a specialization in Jewish studies, Messianic Jewish studies. And so, man, you get a rabbi on and you get him saying some of these things, and I thought it'd really be neat to look at some of the clips. And then have Vocab here because he was the man on the spot. See, and by the way, Deuteronomy says where there are two witnesses, so I got him as a witness speaking for himself, and then I got Vocab here giving some color. So, you know, he ought to applaud my being very Torah honoring by having two witnesses here as to what he said. And we're going to just dissect this a little bit. I want to be respectful, and I'm going to try to as much as possible, but I'm also going to try to be straight with you about Jewish thought a little bit and about some things he said related to Christianity and Judaism that I think are should be understood a little bit better and a little differently. So I have some clips. I have the first clip where he discusses Torah and progressive revelation. We're going to run the clip, and then I'm going to talk to Vocab a little about the background, and then we'll go from there.
You want to play the first clip?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. Here's the first clip that we will be playing today. All right, and let me do one thing. I'm going to turn down our mic so we don't get any.
Here's Torah. I mean, the average person makes no distinction between all these books. I would say the average rabbi does. In other words, anything that's found in Torah carries more weight than something found in the book of Amos or the book of Habakkuk, right? So,
well, can I ask you a question about that?
Sure.
If Isaiah says, "Thus saith the Lord," is he correct when he says that this is Yahweh speaking to his covenant people there, or not? Because if he's correct there, I am wondering how you can say that has a different level of weight than when Moses says, "Thus saith the Lord." It's the same Yahweh speaking through his mouthpieces.
Okay. Now, if the Torah didn't say twice, don't add or take away from these instructions, well, then I would agree with you. If the Torah didn't say in Deuteronomy chapter 12 and 13 that even a prophet can add anything new to the Torah, then I would agree with you. Now, Isaiah himself, in Isaiah chapter 8, says,
now he's majoring on this sort of Torah only thing, which you're going to get from a lot of sources, and this is becoming a little popular, but I call this like a minimalist Judaism. So the first question that kind of comes up after I talk to Vocab, give me a little background here. How did you go from the Kabbalah to Torah only? What do you think the rabbi's point is here?
So the way it worked, Jeff, was when I first heard from Rabbi Asher Meza. So he reached out to me, and he's a really nice guy. I really respect him, really like him. And so, this post-discussion analysis is sort of nothing personal, basically. We're just talking about some of his statements, and we'll do so in a respectful way, so he'll be okay with it, I'm sure, because he's a cool guy. But he reached out and wanted to discuss some things, and I had this feeling that it'd be better to do an interview before a debate, and I wanted to kind of get to know him first, was my thought. And so I said, well, let's think about something we could discuss together, and I wanted it to be something sort of surprising or different. And so what happens is I threw a couple ideas at him, and one that I noticed from his videos was this. He had some stuff against Kabbalah, and I found it interesting. And he had varieties of argumentation, and it was there was enough details in there that I said this would be good to discuss with him about why there should be, as far as an authoritative source, why Kabbalah should be rejected. That was my position, and I wanted to hear what he'd have to say on it based upon the videos. Now, the videos, again, had multiple details. For example, Kabbalah sort of sexualizes God, which was a mistake that the pagans made, that true Judaism, biblical-based Judaism, never made, because it's not how God revealed himself, because that's not who he is. And that was an example of an important point to discuss and break down and all of that he had made in numerous videos on the subject of Kabbalah. However, here's how it went from a discussion of Kabbalah to what we were talking about in this clip you just played. When we actually got down to the discussion, he didn't as much focus on some of those more detail-oriented arguments against Kabbalah. He focused heavier on the simple presupposition that anything outside of the first 5 books of Moses was extraneous or non-authoritative, sort of hands down. And that was the main way he dealt with the Zohar, which is Kabbalah's main source, to say, well, it's simply because it's not the first 5 books of Moses, therefore truths supposedly derived from it can't really be authoritative in Judaism, hands down. And he focused more on that side of the argumentation. And so in that context, in that discussion, he would kind of he made a couple comments about Christianity as well in regards to that. And so I noted a few times during the discussion, well, we're kind of getting sidetracked over here, but if you're okay with it, I'm okay with it, because you sort of brought it up. And it's not like we really hardcore debated, because he was friendly, but definitely we had a disagreeing discussion. I don't know what you want to call it, mixed with an interview. It was a very interesting thing, but his style allowed for that, so I was okay with it. It wasn't like the sort of fiasco with Skylar Fiction, the unkind atheist. And so what happened is we ended up talking about sources for Judaism that were authoritative or not, because it began about Kabbalah, but he ended up making it Kabbalah versus Torah versus sort of Kabbalah versus biblical Judaism. So that's how we ended up there. I hope that made sense, everybody.
Hey, well, I'm glad for the color. That was one of the things I sort of wanted, was to get that going. The first thing that I kind of want to do is unpack this maybe for our audience, because if you don't understand how Jewish law or halacha works, that sounds really good on the surface. And I'm going to mix it with a little personal story here. Okay, when I was growing up, I went to a Jewish camp, and it was connected with what was called the Talmud Torah Association of Judaism, which was an Orthodox association that furthered a Jewish understanding of the Jewish lifestyle and helped us all to grow up to be nice Jewish children. You see kind of how that worked for me.
How'd that work out?
But, the reason it was called Talmud Torah is because we're going to get into it a little, but the idea of a pure Torah Judaism is a fiction. In fact, I'm going to introduce you to a Yiddish word. It's called Bubby Misa. A Bubby Misa is a grandmother's story. And the idea that there's a pure Torah Judaism is really sort of a Bubby Misa. So let me introduce you and unpack a little bit about Jewish law. First of all, there isn't, when he says Torah, there's a little equivocation going on here. That's when I use a term 2 different ways. It's sort of a logical fallacy.
Change the definition in the middle of the argument.
Yeah, and he's sort of doing that because there's this whole thing called the oral law or Talmud. So I want to read you a few quotes. I'm going to take 2 non-Jewish quotes, or a non-Jewish quote and Jewish quotes too. So, if someone says, well, these are Jewish sources, I'm going to, non-Jewish sources, I'm going to throw a combination. Under the entry in the Baker Encyclopedia of the Bible for Talmud, the origin and development of the oral law, the traditional Jews believe that a second law was given to Moses in addition to the first or written word, and that second one was given orally and handed down from generation to generation in an oral form. The Talmud itself makes this claim for an early origin in what's called Pirkei Avot, stating that this is attributed to Moses. I will actually take you to Pirkei Avot. But what I want you to see is that when Jewish people talk about the law, there is the Torah Baal Ketuv, the written Torah, and then the Torah Baal Peh, which is the Torah by mouth, or the oral Torah. So when he says Torah Judaism, he doesn't mean Torah Judaism. And he doesn't mean just the stuff out of the first 5 books. And I'm going to demonstrate that Judaism really couldn't exist if it stuck to a Torah Judaism. That's kind of an absurdity, and really Judaism would have died with the temple if that had been the case. But let me build the case, and then we'll talk about Christianity as this mystic sect later on. Further, now I pulled out a source, okay? I don't know if this source is even visible, but I'm going to try it just because I think it's so excellent. This is called The Sages by Ephraim Erbach. It's sort of a compilation of what the sages of Israel taught. Now, it's not real Christian friendly in some places. It interacts with Paul's writings compared to what the rabbis thought and why they didn't like Paul and some of the other things. But this is a really good sort of panoramic view of what the sages of Israel said. And here's the thing. In the oldest traditions of the oral law, the word Torah is used in 2 different connotations. The men of the great synagogue said 3 things: be deliberate in judging, raise up many disciples, and make a fence around the Torah. That's Midrash Avot, Pirkei Avot. The dictum was directed at the teachers and judges of the people, counseling them how to act in giving judgment, instruction. Torah signifies here the teachings and precepts of the halachot as in the ancient Mishnah. Now let me unpack this for you. This is a Jewish source who has surveyed the sages of Israel, and what he says is, look, Torah was understood in 2 different senses within Judaism. One of them was this written Torah, and the other was this oral Torah that comes along later on. Now, we'll talk about the claims of the oral Torah, and I don't want to get into too far, because someday I want to do a broadcast with my friend Stan Meyer on what's wrong with the oral law.
I'm going to go get you water.
Okay. But that's what you need to understand here, is that is not true, that it's just the 5 books. We're going to talk about how progressive revelation-wise Judaism is. Okay? But you need to understand that when he's using Torah, he's sneaking in another sense of the word here. Now, I think he's being a nice Jewish boy. He understands it this way because in his mind, the written Torah and the oral Torah are both Torah. But when he talks, he's talking as though the written 5 books of Moses is his authority. And that really isn't accurate. Let me pull up another slide here, okay? Vocab's going to get me some water. Again, Baker's Encyclopedia of the Bible. With the cessation of the post-exilic prophets and with the continual development of the complexity of Israel and the relationship to the outer world, there arose a need for further elaboration of the laws of the Pentateuch. And so what the Talmud does is it sort of acts authoritatively as another Torah. And they would say it's just going ahead and clarifying Torah. But it states that it itself has divine authority. We'll talk about the prophets later, because I think he makes some statements there that are a little off. I think my voice is starting to sound raspy.
All right.
Now, before Pirkei Avot, there wasn't a lot of claims here, but I want you to understand something here. Pirkei Avot claims that it goes back to Moses, okay? And at least goes back to, okay? Here's Pirkei Avot 1:1. It's a Jewish source, okay? And it says, Moses received the Torah from Sinai. That would be the 5 books. And passed it on to Joshua. And Joshua to the elders, and the elders to the prophets, and the prophets passed it on to the men of the great assembly. And the comment here, which goes with my edition of Pirkei Avot, points out what this all means. The chain of tradition leads back the sayings in Pirkei Avot and has 2 messages. First, tradition's important. You guys don't need to know that. Just listen to Tevye. Tradition and his little song. The second message is a bold claim is being made for the divine authority of the post-biblical oral Torah. Okay? So Judaism is making the claim that there was this Torah that was never written down. It was just passed on, the secret Torah. And then it was passed down from Moses to Joshua, and then from Joshua to the prophets. But Joshua neglected to write it down too, and then the prophets neglected to write it down. And oh, by the way, it came to Ezra, who is given credit for codifying the Torah, but he forgot to write this down, but he passed it on to the men of the Great Assembly, who there's some debate as to who they were. And then eventually, as the Talmud gets codified in 600, 800 AD, this whole oral law and the rabbinical rulings gets codified into a source which becomes authoritative for the Jewish people.
And so that actually is similar to some argumentation given by Roman Catholics who sometimes will posit sort of an unwritten oral version of the Bible that's almost parallel to it, and basically that all their stuff comes out of that. And to a certain extent, there's evidence, my understanding is some of the Gnostics kind of try to claim a similar thing about some of their Gospels they got. So it's like, if you have this new source basically of authority, you have to find some way to give it a pedigree, not identical, but similar to how with the Zohar, the guy claimed it came from the 2nd century, even though he was a medieval rabbi.
Right, and so the thing is, the Talmud isn't codified and organized, depending whether you're talking about the Babylonian or the Palestinian Talmud, until later. So, how progressive are we talking about here? Okay, there's still quote-unquote secret magical Torah being given until it's all codified in the Talmud until about 800. So how progressive are we talking about here? So there's a priority to the Torah, but the question is, which Torah, Rabbi? Are we talking just the written Torah? Are you really ready to repudiate the Talmud on the air? Because I'd welcome him coming on and repudiating the Talmud. Or are you talking about the Torah like in both senses simultaneously, but pretending that it's just the written Torah? And so that's kind of where that's at. And this was really necessary. We need to understand this. You can't have a Judaism of today, rabbinical Judaism. I'm all for biblical Judaism in the sense that I believe that Jesus is the culmination of biblical Judaism. But you can't have rabbinical Judaism because here's the problem. What do you have for a sacrificial system? Well, this is where it gets interesting. The temple gets destroyed. So now you got two choices. Either join with these Jewish Christian guys that you really can't stand because you don't like their Jesus, okay? Or you do what Yohanan ben Zakkai did. I love this. So that Judaism could decide how to deal with the loss of the sacrificial system of the temple in Jerusalem and other pertinent questions, it referred to a passage in the book of Hosea, I desire mercy and not sacrifice. He helped persuade the council to replace animal sacrifices with prayer, a practice that still continues in today's Jewish worship services. So what does he do? Zakkai doesn't want to go ahead and admit that Jesus might be the Messiah. So they're all horrified because now they don't have a sacrificial system. So he pulls out a line from the prophets and says, well, Leviticus 17:11 really doesn't apply anymore because the prophet Hosea says, I desire mercy and not sacrifice. Now we'll go back to that. But understand that if there was no Talmud, there could be no continued Judaism.
Why do you need the Talmud to have continued Judaism?
Well, because you need something to replace the blood sacrificial system if you don't have Messiah. So you've got to then come up with something. You got to do kind of, may I borrow the Catholic term Hail Mary here, football term? You have to pull out a Hail Mary and try to make this work. And so that's what Zakkai does. He basically calls the council together and says, oh no, what are we going to do now? And it got worse. Okay, there are places where clearly the rabbis recognize that there are needs for changes in Torah. Now, I'm pulling out Michael Brown here. He does a really good job. We'll talk about some other formations of Jewish law here, but he says, look, the rabbis knew there were changes in Jewish law that were needed, and he talks about a few of these. One of the changes that gets required later on is the issue against polygamy. Do you know that the Torah does not outlaw having many wives any place?
I've heard about that.
So really, if Rabbi Asher would like to take another wife right now, and he's not going to abide by Talmud, go at it, buddy. Because Torah-wise, you can't find a single injunction against it.
There may be other reasons why he might not want to do that, though.
Well, there are practical reasons, like it's really a dumb thing to do. But there aren't any Torah reasons why. He would have to look to rabbinical tradition. Now, see, we have an answer for that. My answer is that my ultimate authority is Rabbi Messiah, who went back to the original intent of Torah and gave a ruling related to polygamy by stating, for this reason, a man shall leave his household and a woman leave her home, and the two shall become one flesh. But you see, I have an authority behind me to say that. But, the only thing he can appeal to is rabbinical law.
Yeah, I mean, if it's okay, if I can also read a little small Jewish source. This is kind of a user-friendly guide by Michael Fishbane, just called Judaism on HarperCollins. He talks exactly what you're talking about. So just to understand, Jeff's not making this up as far as what do you do after 70 or 135. So let me read here from page 37. The destruction of the temple in Jerusalem in 70 CE and the subsequent desacralization of the Temple Mount by the Romans were thus a major watershed in the history of Judaism. Like all other religions of antiquity, Judaism also gave enormous centrality to its sacral institutions, to the temple and its priesthood, to the ancient sacrifices of atonement, purification, and thanksgiving, and to the symbolic role of the temple as the abode of God to which penitents and pilgrims came during seasonal celebrations and times of need. In a word, the temple established a concrete domain of access to the holy into divinity, and the priesthood, which controlled the rituals of the temple, also established or administered the rules of holiness as they pertained to many other spheres of life, like rules of contagion and purification, or rules of required or votary donations. To envisage the loss of the temple, therefore, would be to envisage religious life without its sacral forms of divine human intercession, without the possibility of priestly purification for sins and disease, and without the ancient process for divine human reconciliation. But ancient Judaism had survived the Babylonian exile without its priestly institutions, and the loss of the temple in 70 CE continued the process begun centuries before it introduced new transformations. Thus, earlier, without their rites and sacrifices, the Babylonian exiles of 587 BCE developed new modes of piety like communal prayer and generated new treatments of the ancient Torah traditions, particularly their collation, study, and interpretation. During the successive centuries, traces of the increased development of such institutions as synagogues for prayer and houses of study for the learning and reinterpretation of the Torah can be observed, alongside, of course, the renewal and still dominant priestly institutions. Accordingly, when the temple was destroyed, a multifaceted mechanism was already in place for the survival of a Judaism without sacrifices and the hierarchical authority of the priesthood. Last paragraph. And so, two houses, the house of prayer and the house of study, replaced the temple, the house par excellence. Each contributed a new understanding of avodah, or divine service. And that's what you got to do if you don't want to accept Jesus as Messiah.
That's exactly right. And new conditions occurred even beyond that. Michael Brown says, traditional Jews also believe that according to Deuteronomy 17, 8 through 13, which says nothing about the rabbis, by the way, the rabbis have authority to enact new laws, takanot, enactments, and gerazot, decrees, recognizing the need for such developments as certain aspects of Jewish life would change and develop over the centuries. So, just Torah? Well, what about the takanot and the gerazot? What about the rabbinical decrees? Hey, look, my head's covered. You'll notice Rabbi Asher covered his head. That's because a Jewish man, when he prays or discusses God, is supposed to show reverence for God by covering his head, right? There's nothing about a yarmulke in the Torah. There's nothing about prayer shawl and how it's to be tied in the Torah. There's nothing about how to deal with your cell phone in the Torah. You know, I can't find in Deuteronomy, and this shall be the statute for the cell phone unto you. This is all authoritative stuff the rabbis are still dealing with that wasn't necessary to deal with. And so he talked about his community for a reason. He wanted me to know, or anyone listening, that he's part of the Yemenite Sephardic method of injunctions, rabbinical injunctions. That's his community. But Sephardic Jews are allowed the beans and kanot during Passover. Ashkenazi Jews avoid it. So there are even differences in Jewish practice between different communities. Well, how do you explain that if they all have the same Torah and they're all following it? I don't know if Vocab wants to further jump in, or...
Well, I mean, so real quick, when it comes to Yemenite Jews, they are part of the sort of larger Jewish world, although smaller to be certain. But they're a fragment or a section of it who never did accept Kabbalah. And so there's sort of a tie-in there. My understanding is they didn't even kind of know about it for a while, and then when they did know about it, they're like, no, not so much. And so I guess that kind of works for him. But I don't know, the Sephardic folks, what about them in Kabbalah? So are all Yemenites considered part of Sephardic Judaism? Because did he say Sephardic Yemenite? Because that's kind of two different things, or...
The Yemenites would be considered part of Sephardic Judaism. It's the issue, the area of the diaspora. As Jewish communities were dispersed, the European, French, German, a part of the diaspora developed slightly differently than the North African, Spanish, and, a few other groups. And then the Yemenites were even further east. So there are Sephardic Jews that wouldn't necessarily agree with everything rabbinically from the Yemenite rabbinate. So he represents a small part of Jewish tradition. But nevertheless, he quotes Maimonides. We'll get into Maimonides and what he said a heretic was, because that'll get interesting. But he represents a very small community in Judaism. He doesn't necessarily represent the majority tradition in the diaspora. So as we're moving along here, let me just... I just wanted to reiterate here, Torah Judaism is not just Torah Judaism. It's not just written Torah Judaism, and to say otherwise is disingenuous a little bit, because it doesn't take into account that the Torah includes the oral law or the Talmud. And so it's not as simple as just the 5 books. It's the 5 books and the authorized understanding of those 5 books with new rules and even new revelation from God, in a sense. He wouldn't call it that, but their rulings have divine authority. If God tells you how to do something and it has divine authority, that's pretty revealing to me. And so that's where that's at. He did hint something else. We can look at the next clip where he thinks that Christianity is just a mystical sect out of Judaism.
And so, we're talking about Kabbalah, but Rabbi Asher Meza, he made a offhand comment when he's talking about sort of, hey, these mystical Judaism sects, or these mystical sects from Judaism. And he says Christianity is one of them. We never got too deep into that, but this is why the discussion took a turn, is because sort of some of the offhand comments. But again, I'm not saying it was bad necessarily. I think the discussion was very enlightening and eye-opening, but it was different enough that I went back later, actually, and retitled it and changed the cover image, because I thought, well, the way I had it sort of advertised is not exactly how it turned out, and it's because of things like this. But I still think it was a fascinating, very interesting, enlightening discussion nonetheless. But here is the next clip that you have pulled.
For it, just because Christianity was one of these mystical / pseudo sects of the first century that made it famous, right, or made it big and didn't ultimately die out. In other words, there's a lot of metaphysical ideas, developed metaphysical ideas, that are the basis of Christianity that really weren't endorsed by earlier texts. Things that many rabbis of the time considered also heretical. So this is why the average Messianic Jew nowadays is probably more into Kabbalah than the average Orthodox Jew, because he finds texts that speaks about God in a corporeal fashion, in a pluralistic fashion, like the 10 Sephirot, like the 10... I don't know, like, have you ever seen these Kabbalistic drawings that split up God into 10 segments or 10 emanations?
Yes.
Right? Now, that is not too far off from the Trinity. I'm not sure how you hold it with the doctrine of the Trinity. But there's a lot of these concepts.
I'm fully Trinitarian.
Right. So that in itself could be classified as Kabbalistic. So it's hard for me to understand why.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that good, because I listened to that comment and I went, whoa, wait a minute now. First of all, I want to give Rabbi Asher some credit. First of all, he used the term Messianic Jews, which I really appreciated, because he isn't questioning my ethnic Jewishness. And he isn't even questioning the fact that I still identify with the Jewish people. And he isn't doing the stupid thing that I'm not a Jew anymore, because that, to me, is like blowing your brains out. I mean, it's absurd. But he hinted, first of all, the term pseudo-sect was an interesting term to me, okay?
Do you think he means like a pseudo-Judaism? I think that's what he meant.
Probably.
It would be a sect. I don't think it means it's a pseudo-sect. I mean, I think it means pseudo-Judaism.
Probably. The term he's borrowing from is the term minim, which means sectarians. It's used in the Talmud frequently. It does refer to the Judeo-Christians or Jewish Christians or Messianic Jews of the first century. By the way, Messianic Jews existed before. They existed during the first century and continued to have a strong identity into the third. I can refer you to a book by another gentleman that points that out, but that's neither here nor there. He's at least being honest there, and I appreciate it. And he was being kind of nice, but he was also throwing a little jab in there that we need to kind of dissect.
As the young people say, shots fired.
Yeah. We're going to talk about resurrection as one of those mystical Jewish beliefs, but let's talk about the Trinity here. This totally fascinates me. Because the Kabbalah comes later, and the 10 Sefirot come later, but the discussion that was going on during the first century was about how an immanent God, transcendent God, could enter his world, and it was a legitimate discussion. And so he sort of infers that there's somehow these mystical beliefs that rabbis would never, ever, ever tolerate. So let's talk about some of these beliefs and where they come from. Let's talk about the angel of the Lord. I'm pulling from Isidore Singer's The Jewish Encyclopedia, descriptive record of Jewish history, religion, and literature, and the customs of the Jewish people from earliest times to the present day. I know Funk and Wagnall did it, but they did it in cooperation to create an encyclopedia of Jewish concepts. Let's look at this line here. In the earlier Bible writings, the term malach, I'm going to use Yahweh, messenger of the Lord, occurs chiefly in the singular and signifies a special self-manifestation of God. See Genesis 31:11 through 13, where the angel of the Lord, or the angel of God, says, I am the God of Bethel. And then Exodus 3:2 through 6, where the angel of the Lord appeared to Moses in a flame of fire, saying, I am the God of thy father. Now let's look at this, because this is Torah, right? This isn't some 10 sphirot. Okay? This is Torah. So, the encyclopedia, Jewish encyclopedia, is saying, look, this concept of God having a distinct, separate from himself, personal self-manifestation is something that goes back to the earliest part of Torah. If you look at Genesis 31, 11 through 13, the angel of the Lord spoke to me in a dream, saying, Jacob, and I said, here I am. And he said, lift thy eyes up and see all the rams which leap upon the flocks that are streaked, speckled, and gray-spotted. For I have seen what Laban is doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, who anointed the pillar where you made a vow. Now arise, get out of the land, and return to the land of your family. Now, wait a minute. God here is the angel of the Lord. Well, wait a minute now. Who's running the universe and who's in heaven while the angel of the Lord is appearing to Jacob? Okay, so we have a manifestation of God that is separate from God, that is personal, and that is deity. Those are foundations for the Trinity. So the Trinity isn't some mystical concept. The Trinity is the natural trajectory of what God's revealing by having these theophanies or self-manifestations, and they're all in Torah. In fact, you see more of these theophanies in Torah than you do maybe in the historic books. I mean, I haven't done a number count, but yeah, he's distinct from God, he's deity, and he's personal. So when people are talking about the Trinity, they're talking about more than one person in the Godhead that's distinct from God, deity, and a person. So the foundations are not some sort of thing by Isaac Luria, even though that makes a nice way to talk about these things. They are things that occur in Torah, and we have an example of that. Vocab's reaching for the same book I've got. Excellent. God, Torah, and Messiah by Dr. Louis Goldberg, who was the head of the Jewish Studies Department at Moody Bible. And so, we have that there. But to state that it's some mystical concept that was not okayed by the rabbis, well, historically, and I can point this out with a book by Bayarin, which, by the way, Kindle has for about $1.75 Kindle edition of the Jewish Gospels by Bayarin, which talks about binitarianism. And yes, the rabbis later outlawed it because they didn't like where it led. They didn't like it. Torah was fine with it. The rabbis weren't fine with it. And so they reacted, but Torah has it in there. So again, it's who's your authority? Are the rabbis your authority, or is Torah your authority? If Torah is your authority, this isn't such a big problem. I love the Exodus. The angel of the Lord appears, and he is very clear that I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Who's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? The angel of the Lord is. Is this Torah? This is a key portion of Torah. I mean, the Jewish parable, it keeps calling God the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob because of sections like this. This isn't a later thing at all. This isn't some later thing. The outworking of the Trinity, the full revealing of the Trinity awaits the New Testament, but the foundations are in Torah. And so when he says some things the rabbis didn't approve of, yes, he means Talmud. He means some things the Talmud didn't approve of. The second invisible Torah that was not written down, that finally got codified later when Christianity or belief in Messiah was on the outs with Judaism, it said this was wrong. But Torah never claimed that the angel of the Lord couldn't receive worship.
I don't know if it's helpful to read a little bit. This is a helpful book. I got this because Jeff is the one who recommended it for me But it says, even from the Jewish point of view, this passage has always been a mystery. Here's the passage. I am going to send an angel before you to protect you as you journey and to bring you into the place that I have prepared. Take heed because of him and obey his voice. Do not rebel against him, for he will not pardon your transgressions, for my name is in him. Rashi suggests, quote, Our rabbis said that he, the angel, is Metatron, whose name is even as the name of his master. For it has the numerical value, 314, the Almighty, and then he refers to Sanhedrin 38b, an astounding statement. But what further information can be gleaned as to the nature of this mysterious Metatron? An interesting discussion in Tractate Sanhedrin occurs where a min, that's a Messianic Jew, witnessed to a prominent leader in the Jewish community. Once a min said to Rabbi Idith, It is written, and unto Moses he said, Come up to the Lord. But surely it should have stated, Come up unto me. It was Metatron who said that, he replied, whose name is similar to that of his master. For it is written, For my name is in him. But if so, he retorted, we should worship him. The same passage, however, replied Rabbi Idith, says, Be not rebellious against him, i.e., exchange me not for him. But if so, why is it stated he will not pardon your transgressions? He answered, By our truth we would not accept him even as a messenger, for it is written, and he said to him, If thy personal presence go not, etc. There's more on that, but just trying to give some of the background of this book. I don't know if that's helpful or hurtful, but I know you did something on Metatron recently, so hopefully it's helpful.
No, that's good. And hey, look, quoting Dr. Louis Goldberg is always welcome. And so that's kind of exciting. You do want to see the tension there with Rashi, because he's a Talmudist, he's a Jewish scholar. Next to the Rambam, Rashi is one of the great thinkers.
Who's the Rambam?
The Rambam is Moses Maimonides, who Rabbi sort of likes. Rabbi Asher likes Maimonides. He's not going to like Maimonides by the time we're done today, because we're going to have some real fun with Maimonides and what he considers Torah doctrines.
Sounds like a great book. Fun with Maimonides.
It sort of does. The point is that when you look for these theophanies, guess where you find them? You find them in Torah. So the rabbis and the Talmud have a problem with this. By the way, the argument that Rashi uses can be pushed aside fairly quickly, because there are places where the angel of the Lord clearly receives worship, like in Exodus 3, where Moses is told to take off his feet, for the ground he stands on is holy ground. And so you don't do that if it's just your average garden variety angel. And then you have the Shekinah, and they're all worshiping before the Shekinah at the end of Exodus, when the Shekinah fills the tabernacle. So you have some real problems there if you're going to go ahead and use that argument. It was real nice. They like to use some arguments and push the minim away. But that's a bunch of junk. And so I'm not saying the rabbi's bad, but I'm saying, again, he's shading things a little bit here. Okay. He's not being legit. There were a few other concepts that he thought we got. Belief in Satan. Now the Torah doesn't mention Satan by name because of the use of the term the serpent. By the way, I'd love to know why Rabbi Asher thinks that like snakes talked. That is the rabbinical standard counter, is that, it was a garden snake, but it was an extremely smart garden snake that happened to learn basic ancient languages and was highly conversant in the garden.
So you're saying the standard rabbinic position does away with, in some way, Satan empowering or something like that, the snake animating him, that it's actually a pre-fall snake that is just starting to speak. I wonder if they think part of the curse is that animals would no longer be able to allow to do that or something like that. But then I wonder what they would say about what happens with Balaam's donkey, because it almost seems like a time where Yahweh did the same. I don't know. That's interesting. Well, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk about how that guts Judaism and guts the Bible real nicely. By the way, not all rabbis take that view. Some of them clearly believe that the snake was Satan. Let me just take you to a place where Satan is acknowledged in relationship to the Torah. Now, is it Torah saying this? No. But we're talking Talmud here. And so unless Rabbi Asher is prepared to repudiate Talmud, Although he might say this is just kind of a homiletical statement and it's a nice preaching illustration. I say tough luck. That's not where it appears in the Talmud. Okay? We're talking about Talmud tractate Sanhedrin. Sanhedrin was the Jewish Supreme Court. So we're into the record of the Jewish Supreme Court here. This is Sanhedrin 89b. It came to pass after these words that God tested Abraham. And then the response is given. What is the meaning of after? Said Rabbi Yohanan in the name of Rabbi Yossi ben Zimra, it was after the words of Satan. D, for it is written, and the children grew and were weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the same day that Isaac was weaned. That's Torah, that's Genesis 22:8 that's being commented on. And Satan said to the Holy One, blessed be he, Lord of the world, as to this old man, you have shown him grace by giving him the fruit of the womb at 100 years old. Now of the entirety of the meal that he has made, he did not give a single pigeon or a single dove to offer before you. And he said to him, he has done anything at all except honor his son. But if I were to say to him, sacrifice your son before me, he would sacrifice him immediately. And forthwith God tested Abraham. Now see what's going on here? The rabbis believe that there was a cosmic battle which goes on between God and Satan and impacts Abraham. By the way, this is one of the reasons the Talmud gives for the ram's horn being blown on Yom Kippur, because Satan is the accuser of Israel, and he will be put to flight by the sound of the ram's horn. And so it is blown. And so what I'd say is the sages are pretty clear that there's a Satan, and they clearly believe that he's active in accusing Israel and the patriarchs.
Gerard Perry brings out, and I think he might be accurate, that Rabbi Asher Meza sounded pretty skeptical on the Talmud.
Well, that's absolutely fine, except for one thing. Judaism is not skeptical of the Talmud. And so if he wants to do that, then let him claim that he has a new minim. We'll talk about this, because we both can have coffee as heretics. And we'll see that, according to sound Jewish thinking, he really falls outside the pale. If he wants to say, I have my own, Rabbi Asherite minimalist Judaism, I'm perfectly okay with that. But when he says this is what Judaism teaches, normative Judaism recognizes the Talmud. And this is Tractate Sanhedrin. By the way, this is the same tractate that basically disrespects Jesus. So if he wants to go ahead and remove Sanhedrin, I could be very happy with him removing Sanhedrin's account of the trial of Jesus, which, by the way, isn't all that accurate an account.
What do you think of this? But is Satan not called Ha-Satan with a definite article as the adversary?
He is called Ha-Satan in some places, and the definite article is there. But John clearly, with a strong Jewish background, refers to him as the serpent of old, going back to Torah, by the way. Where did these believers and apostles get their foundations for theology? And so he's also referred to as the serpent of old. The Ha there is because Satan is not a personal name, it's a title. And so it's easy to say the adversary.
Well, he even sounded skeptical of some of the prophets, in my opinion.
Well, we're gonna get to his big verse out of Isaiah where he can disrespect the prophets, and we're gonna talk about what somebody has to believe. Okay, let's talk about the resurrection though, because that really floored me when he indicated that the resurrection was one of these mystical doctrines that does not have to be accepted.
Right. It's optional.
It's optional. So let's talk about how optional this is. This is the Babylonian Talmud, Sanhedrin 11:1. These are the ones who have no portion in the world to come. He who says the resurrection of the dead is a teaching not derived from Torah, and the Torah does not come from heaven, and the Epicurean. So according to Talmud, he's Minim.
Right.
We could both have coffee and have a heretics club. Because according to Talmud, this guy is denying the resurrection, loses one a place in the world to come. And so this doesn't sound very optional to me unless, again, he wants to gut the Talmud. And then he better take out his pair of scissors and find it.
Gerard Perry says, I wouldn't be a fan of the prophets either if I shared his beliefs.
Well, he's going to have no choice because we're going to talk about the place of the prophets. But just understand something, that resurrection was considered to be a Torah-derived doctrine. It was not considered a mystical doctrine later. It was considered a doctrine directly derived from the Torah.
Well, I know about Daniel 12:2. Where would people go in the Torah? Would they use Jesus' argument?
Yeah, I think that's a good place to go. And what's hysterical is that the Pharisees, who end up becoming the Talmud writers, really love it when Jesus puts the Sadducees in their place. The Sadducees were considered heretics, by the way. So not believing in the resurrection is being a Sadducee, which is being a heretic.
What's the difference between Rabbi Asher Meza and a Sadducee? Besides the fact he's not on the Sanhedrin.
Yeah, well, that's the problem. His Judaism was not only minimalist. The Sadducees only believed in the 5 books as authoritative, and they disrespect. He's actually talking about a Sadducean form of Judaism almost. To which I say, well, the Talmud was very clear that the Sadducees were out. They were sectarians.
But that's different than Yemenite Judaism, because Yemenite Judaism does accept the Tanakh, correct?
Yemenite Judaism, would accept Talmud. Now, the problem is...
What about the Tanakh?
Well, they would accept the Tanakh, too. I don't know of any form of Judaism today. Now, he's right about something, and when we get to the prophets, we'll discuss it. There is priority given to Torah. We have to be honest about that.
What does that... I guess my question is, what does that mean, priority? I mean, it comes first. It sets foundation. Yes. But it's not like we have a situation where if one contradicts the other. So, excuse me, in what way do we mean by that, I guess?
Well, the rabbis did a thing with levels of holiness, which, by the way, I don't know quite how that works because something's either holy or it's not.
Yeah, so the rabbis did that. What do you think Scripture itself says about, even if you just took do the prophets consider themselves in fear? I mean, what does the Scripture itself do?
The Scripture itself doesn't make a distinction between the holiness of the prophets and the holiness of Torah. The prophets are indeed law enforcers, but that doesn't mean they don't give more information. He's made a logical fallacy. He's made a fallacy that because the purpose of the prophets was to lead Israel back to the covenant relationship they had with God, that no changes in Torah were allowed and no new information could be given. And that's a fallacy. So he's gone too far. And we'll demonstrate, again, I'm going to go back to Judah ben Zakkai because he does a funny thing with the prophets and the Torah. But just to let you know, and you can comment on it, what point, from a New Testament standpoint, what point do you think Jesus is making in pointing out that God says I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, as opposed to he was?
Well, the idea is that they're in some way continuous, that they're alive, that they're not gone. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how you describe it further than that, but he's doing it based upon the grammar.
Right. He's using the fact that nochi is a present tense in the Hebrew, as opposed to using perfectly good ways of indicating a completed action, what would be called the perfect tense, which would be read as a past tense in most cases. And so Jesus is making the point that God is not a God of the dead, but of the living. Therefore, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are living. And by the way, Judaism doesn't look at the soul as being intended to being bodiless forever. So we can talk about Daniel, but the point is that there's an indication of a clear afterlife as early as Exodus chapter 3, if not sooner. And so the idea of some sort of hopeless non-afterlife Judaism just doesn't really fly. But beyond that, is he obligated to believe in the resurrection? Now, this is where it gets interesting. One of the things that was clearly indicated is that the resurrection was required, that a person who didn't believe in the resurrection had no share in the world to come. Moses Maimonides makes the resurrection one of his 13 articles.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I believe in the resurrection. I believe with perfect faith, ma'amim, in the resurrection. The second paragraph of the Shemona Esrei, which if he prays the prayer book at all, he recites daily. And I think on my phone I even have it. It's perfectly okay. It's a beautiful passage. The first two paragraphs of the Shemona Esrei are just great, if understood, within a certain context. But it's clear. I'm going to try to reach it and pull it up here, just to see if I can get it. But what I want you to know is the Shemona Esrei itself, if my phone will cooperate, because it's deciding to put other things up that I don't need, like this address, okay? But I have a complete Siddur on my phone, which I carry. By the way, again, this is not dissing Jewish customs. Some of them are really beautiful, and there are a lot of Jewish customs I keep. This is about, the way he's portraying this minimalist Judaism and kind of saying, well, everything that Christians believe is really some sort of weird mystic belief.
Yeah, I mean, I hear one place people go is Daniel 12:2. I think I might have mentioned that, but I don't know if that was before or after I understood the level at which he was rejecting the rest of the Tanakh. That's one of the main places I know. So I'm curious about the rabbis who, in the Talmud, made such a strong statement. For example, the statement we read, that says, if you don't believe in the resurrection, in essence, you don't have any share in the world to come. I'd love to hear, I wonder how much they developed the argument and how sort of Torah-based it was or Tanakh-based it was, But I know about Daniel 12:2 hinting it, and I don't, that's something, I'm still learning about. Even in this book I just went through, all the entries for resurrection, they were all from the New Covenant. It's not to say there's not Old Testament ones, as I mentioned, but I just went through them when we were talking. As far as the ones in the index in the back, they were all from the New Testament scriptures. But
what he's pointing to, by the way, the Daniel is considered under the writings, not under the prophets, because he did not prophesy in the land and he did not hold the office of prophet. Go figure, because there's plenty of stuff there. I'm thinking it's in Sanhedrin. I think it's either 98, but it's very clear that he who says there is no resurrection has no share in the life to come. And I can't pull up. I have
I got the. You want the reference where that's from? I got it. You talking about the source for that Talmudic statement?
Yeah.
Yeah, I got it. Just give me a second.
Okay. In the meantime, I have the sec. Okay.
Sorry. Here it is. It's it's Cohen quoting.
Yeah, it's Cohen, because Cohen has Every Man's Talmud,
yeah.
And I have Every Man's Talmud at home, but I couldn't put my hand on it.
But that's
yeah.
what it has. It's
that's
page
right.
368 in your.
Yeah. He's quoting Sanhedrin. If you want another good book, Every Man's Talmud is an excellent book, and I in the future can go ahead and put that. It's pretty easy to get. It's kind of a summary of the Talmud in key doctrines, and it's a really interesting thing. You just got to be a little careful. But here's what I would end up saying. I have the second paragraph of the Shemona Esrei in my head, but I'm not gonna try to do that just from my head. But it's very clear, that it's all about the resurrection. And so, admittedly, the Sadducees did not believe in the resurrection, but the rabbis who codified the Talmud said, hey, we win, you lose. The resurrection's clearly there. And so the Judaism that he's discussing is not the Judaism that the Talmud affirms in the area of the resurrection. So the resurrection's not a mystical doctrine. By the way, he probably doesn't like the Lubavitch much, because they clearly believe that Rabbi Schneerson's going to rise from the dead. So I don't know. It'd be fun to have him and a Lubavitch sit there on the street, and he can explain to the Hasidic Lubavitch how his Judaism is filled with mystical concepts that the rabbis never approved of. And that's a conversation that I would just love to watch and have a cup of coffee over, because that would just be pure fun. So
in the book, as far as when we talk about sources, chapter 2 in this book, and actually chapter 3 to a certain extent, are about the doctrine of the Word of God, and so it's kind of helpful, I think, for what we're talking about.
It is, and the reason that Dr. Goldberg does this is that's the way Jews divide up doctrine, by the way. Is God the Torah? I mean, their categories are different than ours. They view the central doctrine of God as being first, and then God's covenant document to Israel is the next thing that they focus on. So their categories are different, which is what makes the comparison of these two systems really interesting for me, because as a Jew, I look at the Bible with slightly different categorical eyes than someone else, having gotten used to the different category system.
I can't remember. I feel like I did see a systematic theology that started off with God before Bible, if that's what you're saying.
Well, you're always going to see that. There were two other attempts, by the way, to go ahead and codify. Sadia Gaon in the 3rd century came up with a document that had the basic beliefs of Judaism. And then when you go to the 11th century or 12th century, you have a codification. By the way, belief in Messiah is present both in Maimonides and the 11th century attempt to create a creed for Judaism. And every morning when you get to what's called the Ma'amim, and there's there's a song based on what's called the Yigdal. You affirm belief in Messiah. I believe with perfect faith in Messiah, though he tarry, yet will I expect him. And I believe in perfect faith in the resurrection. So that's in the Yigdal. It's in the Adon Olam. It's in the Ma'amim. Key prayers or prominent prayers in the Jewish prayer book. So I think we have a third clip.
Yes, we do.
Let's talk about the prophets.
All right.
Hang with us.
Is Judaism just Torah? Here we go.
Everything I speak does not shed light on the word and the testimony. On the Torah, there's no light in my words. In other words, everything that Isaiah is bringing down has to have its source in Torah for it to be validated. The job of the prophet is only there to bring you back to Torah. But the only command that we have to listen to a prophet in Torah is Deuteronomy chapter 18, that says that when you begin to stray, God will raise up for you a prophet. And if you don't heed his words, in other words, the job of the prophet is only there to bring you back to the Torah when you begin to stray on a national level.
Well, it says,
so this is why
Deuteronomy 18 says he'll speak all that I have commanded him. So the office of prophet is established, and the thing is that this sounds like a Judaism that's only backwards looking, but when I read the rest of the Hebrew scriptures, I see a Judaism that's also forward looking. And that's why you see these concepts that many people have spoken about way before Christianity, such as, who is this suffering servant?
That's the thing, because Judaism...
Who is this reigning king that sits on the throne of David? That's forward-looking. That's not just something in Torah. You can't point someone to the throne of David when David hadn't existed in Torah, you know?
Because Torah doesn't endorse the notion of progressive revelation. But the simple fact that it says twice, don't add or take away from this, means that there is a safety net there.
Okay, so let's start parsing this. First of all, it doesn't say when you stray in Deuteronomy 18. Okay, the people were getting God's word, and they said, let us hear no more. And then God said to Moses, I will raise up a prophet like you from among your brethren. There's no line in that Torah passage that says, when you stray. Now, admittedly, the office of prophet was as a law enforcer.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in Deuteronomy 18, and I understand that's a concept he brings out. He's saying, hey, the office of the prophet is there when you stray to bring you back, and it's true that prophets did that, but it seems like he's adding to Deuteronomy 18 in an effort to make sure we don't add to the word of God.
Yeah, and so he yes, the prophets were law enforcers, but they did two things. They warned Israel of judgment, and they also told Israel of a future hope. So I love the comment that you made, Vocab, about Judaism in the Bible being forward-looking as well as backward-looking. I also love the comment about David's throne. If he wants to go ahead and claim that David will not be, that Messiah will not come from the line of David, he can go ahead and do that, but there's no basis in Torah for a Davidic Messiah. Let's just look at what Judaism has to say. I love this. Okay, and I'm pulling up something from the sages here.
And while you're bringing that up real quick, I know what he's saying in a sense, but he says, hey, if Isaiah brings something up, and if it's not based or rooted in Torah, it's not authoritative or something like that, that's not exactly right. I know what he's saying, but see, it's really, well, then why is Torah authoritative? It's because it's based or founded, its source is Yahweh. So same thing with Isaiah. It's not necessarily, well, is it rooted or based in Torah? It's really, is it rooted or based in Yahweh? And that's the question under discussion. Is the only time Yahweh give any divine revelation and disclose himself to his people, these 5 books, and that's it, no more? Or are there other times where Yahweh did that for his people?
Now, here's the interesting thing. The Amorim, the earliest Talmud writers, absolutely hated this sort of idea. From the sages, page 306 and 307, hence the Amorim. Now, there were 3 different waves of Talmud writers, okay? I shouldn't say the earliest. The Amorim were, you have the Tanim, the Amorim. They weren't necessarily the earliest. The Tanaic was the earliest. But here's the point. They were able to polemicize against sectarian groups that belittled the utterance of the prophets. Evidence for such a polemic has survived in the anonymous homily when it says self came, he began to give ear to all my people, to my Torah. And that's a quote from Psalm 78:1. Said to Israel, to Asaph, is there another Torah that you say, give ear, O my people, to my Torah? We already possessed the Torah at Sinai, or we already received it at Mount Sinai. He answered and said, the transgressors of Israel say the prophets and the writings, they have the longer word for the writings, are not Torah, and they do not believe in them, as it is stated, neither have they hearkened to the voice of the Lord their God to walk in his laws, which he has set before his servants. Now, what's going on here is...
by his servants, the prophets.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
So here's the thing. Asaph asks, is there another Torah? Because we already have it. And then the divine response is, well, the prophets and the writings are Torah too. So again, the question I have for Rabbi Asher is, which Torah are you talking about?
That's just a way to say that they're also canonical. Or
they're also canonical.
They're from Yahweh.
The word Torah means instruction. It has the idea of divine instruction. And so, within the rabbis, there were groups that didn't like the prophets. By the way, the Sadducees didn't. And the writings. And so it's not just Rabbi Asher. It's actually, this was a very old thing that Judaism dismissed a long time ago. And he's kind of bringing it back. So everything Isaiah lays down, let's look at Isaiah 8:20. Okay?
Say amen when you're there. I'm there, amen.
Okay, I've got it on the slide. I'm looking at to the law and to the testimony. If they do not speak according to this word, it is because there is no light in them. Do I agree with Rabbi Asher? Yes. I believe there's consistency between the prophets and Torah, but he's taking it too far. The context of Isaiah 8 is mediums and spiritualists who are giving false doctrine to Israel. Isaiah isn't saying that God can't say something more. He's saying that these spiritualists and these mediums that are giving revelation don't line up with Torah, and so they're antithetical to what has been given before. But clearly, the sages of old said that Messiah will have authority to give decisions and expound halachot transcending the existing Torah. He was not speaking about new revelation. So he will be able to give new revelation, Messiah, and new halachot, which means new laws. So, clearly, Messiah is free to go ahead and do that. I'm seeing some really neat conversation. Why do the Nevi'im and... Gerald's asking, why do the Nevi'im and the Ketuvim exist? Because more information was necessary. God gives new revelation when more information is absolutely necessary to the functioning of a covenant or a period of time or an epoch. And so more information will be given when Messiah comes. Well, Messiah came because the epoch is different. And so that's the reason for that. But that's out of context. Dealing with his Deuteronomy 12:13, whatever I command you, be careful to observe it. Do not add nor take away from it. The question is, in the Torah, who's the you? The you refers to Israel. It doesn't refer to God. God doesn't say that he can't give additional or new information. He says Israel can't add to the divine Torah because man can't add to God's word. That's the point of the passage. So he says, if Torah hadn't said, do not add or subtract from it, I would be okay. A prophet is not a human being adding or subtracting from Torah. A prophet is a person who God has given direct instruction to, or Torah to, in addition to the written Torah. And so it's Torah too. It's divine instruction. And so even in the writings of the rabbis, the prophets and writings are considered Torah. Is the Torah holier or higher? Well, yes, Judaism tends to regard the Torah as higher because it's the covenant document. But Judaism does not deny that God continued to give information or revelation in traditional normative Talmud. And then I just go back to the statement I made before. The whole basis for removing the sacrificial system is not the Torah. The Torah never allows for anything other than blood atonement. What did Yohanan ben Zakkai do? He took Hosea 6:6 and based a rabbinical ruling that the sacrificial system wasn't needed and a prayer could replace it, based not on Torah, but in distinction from Torah, in contrast to Torah. So if the prophets can't trump Torah, then Rabbi Asher has to go back to the sacrificial system, because nowhere in the Torah does it allow that the shedding of blood is not for the forgiveness of sin and is not required by God. So Torah Judaism would require blood atonement, but the Judaism of the rabbis that takes a portion of the prophets over and above Torah made a rabbinical ruling that it now considers Torah. Isn't that kind of interesting? So he's a little inconsistent there.
So, in 15 minutes, we'll be at an hour and a half.
Okay, well, what time is it?
Oh, your battery's running low. By the way, everybody, if you're watching this, please subscribe to Jeff's channel. He does a lot of stuff relating to Old and New Testament and how they intertwine. He gets into historical and extra biblical sources relating to Judaism and Christianity. He does stuff on Messiah, just a lot of good stuff, answers sort of so-called anti-missionaries, and he has a lot of information sort of about modern-day Judaism and apologetics and polemics. So really good stuff there. So subscribe to him. Visit the website Zion's Banner. You can consider supporting him. And I just thought this comment was funny. I saw one of the Kabod vans with, how do you say it? How do you pronounce
Menachem Schneerson.
Face the last time I was in Williamsburg. So those are the the mobiles you mentioned?
Yeah, that's a mitzvah mobile.
Mitzvah mobile, yeah. So it's apparently someone's seen some.
You saw a mitzvah mobile running around.
Gerard Perry has a question. Why isn't Torah sufficient? Why do the Nevi'im and Ketuvim even exist?
Okay, well, first of all, when you're talking about the exile, you obviously need information. You obviously needed some hope. You needed a way to deal with the exile. And so when you're talking the Babylonian captivity, problem really does exist. But even beyond that, Israel needed to be pointed beyond Torah to the one who is going to be the living Torah, to Messiah, the ultimate new Moses. By the way, Messiah, even in some of the rabbinical writings, is clearly stated to be higher than Moses, and to be the new Moses. And so
Gerard Perry says, but I mean the way he's describing the rest of the Old Testament, it sounds like everything beyond the Torah is simply there to emphasize or explicate points in the Torah, which I think that's an accurate summary.
That is an accurate summary. It's a little bit anemic. Yes, that is true, but that's not where it ended. If Israel had had no hope, and that's going to lead me to some final points that I really want to make.
Miss Piggy says, he is a bit weird indeed.
He's a little bit weird. He's trying to create kind of like a hip form of Judaism. Okay? And it really doesn't work. Two kind of thoughts that I want to kind of really leave. The question that a Jewish follower of Messiah really faces, and it's the one that I faced, is who's going to be your authority? Are you going to be under Rabbi Jesus or under the rabbis of Judaism?
Those are your two choices?
Yeah, really. And that's where I want to go ahead and say, I've got dear brothers in the Messianic movement, and I'm going to say the Jewish believing community really needs to elevate Jesus. While it honors and respects Jewish customs, it needs to uphold the authority of Jesus in the New Testament above the Talmud and the rabbis. And you don't need to look any further than Hebrews, which was written to Jewish believers, which says that God in these last days has spoken to us through his Son, who he appointed heir of all things. So I'd encourage dear brothers who might be tempted, like Stuart Dahlman or like Mark Kinzer, to get away from this whole thing of elevating the rabbis too much. The last thing is Judaism under Rabbi Asher doesn't answer the big questions. A Judaism that does not honor the full story of God, such as the cosmic battle, cannot answer the problem of evil, and it cannot give a future hope. And so a Judaism that doesn't honor God's whole story can't answer the questions that Judaism needs to be able to answer, but still, even without Jesus, can't answer adequately.
Right.
But his is even worse. It's even more anemic. It's like taking out the patient's liver in order to help their broken arm. It's really not a good plan. And the other thing, Rabbi Asher's Judaism leaves people following rules, but it gives them no hope, and it doesn't answer the problem of evil. A good book I'm reading is The Theodicy of Love. And Jews are very interested in the problem of evil because of the Holocaust.
Yeah, and there was actually, a lot of people know the title, and I think the title was, Why Do Bad Things Happen to Good People? It was Harold Feldman.
Kushner.
Okay, Kushner. And I think the answer he ends up giving, Jeff, is that there's pockets of reality in which God is not in control of, basically. And so that's how evil comes into play, sort of almost like an open theism type of view. At least that was my recollection.
It's called Finism, and it's not a good answer. The answer I'm reading now is much better. And I think it's more in keeping with not only the New Testament, but even the Old Testament, where you have Satan coming before the sons of God and making accusations, such as Job.
We got a couple final questions maybe we can get, and I'm glad you're here. Struggling with bilateral versus one law. Any recommendations? Here you go.
Thank you. I understand what he's talking about. One law is the idea that the Gentiles are pretty much under the ceremonial laws of Israel, the Torah in general. Look, it's very simple. There's a Torah of Messiah. I know there's a Torah of Messiah because Moses never baptized in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So if Jesus gives authoritative ordinances, he's giving new Torah. And if he's giving new Torah, there's a Torah of Messiah. You can see my dissertation when it's done because that's what I'm dealing with.
Reading Kinsner and Haig.
Oh, my. Kinsner. Good old Mark Kinsner. Mark Kinsner is playing with the idea that tradition plus the scriptures. He's kind of taking a Catholic view, but he's replaced the tradition with Jewish tradition. He's a sweet guy, and I'm not going to disrespect him, but I'm going to say, you're the one I'm warning. Don't get too close to the rabbis. Choose Rabbi Jesus over the rabbis.
Okay.
You can't have it both ways.
What about Haig? H-E-G-G?
I wrote about him consistently. Haig has major theological problems. Some of his responses to Jester are not good. When it says that the Torah will come out of Zion, it does not mean it's the exact reiteration of the same Mosaic Talmud. Even the rabbis didn't believe that.
So what does he need to read instead of Kinsner and Haig, because your dissertation's not done?
What does he need to do? God, Torah, and Messiah is good. I think there's some stuff by Jester.
Jester?
Yes. I can probably put a few things together. If there's any material by Walter Kaiser, Kaiser's view I am really coming to appreciate.
Kiser.
And you're speaking to a moderate dispensation, and I still like Kaiser.
Isn't Kaiser dispensationalist?
But he's less dispensationalist than Wayne Strickland is, by far.
So, like, he's more progressive dispensationalist or something like that?
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't had the chance to have coffee with him. If he ever wants to invite me out, I will sit and listen to.
Well, come to ETS, because last year at ETS, while we're sitting there, I get up from our table with David Wood and a whole bunch of other people. I sort of lost track of who I was there. I turn around, and there's a couple people at another table that I know, and sitting right there is Walter Kaiser having a conversation. So my point is, come to ETS. You can literally have coffee with Walter Kaiser and maybe even some bagels and schmear.
There you go. Haven't been able to do it yet, but maybe the Lord will provide. So
let's do this. A couple people have been asking about book recommendations that we went to today. So let's, what we can do is, and I appreciate Roxby's dropping the links in there. What we can do is we can take the comments that we have from books as far as what we've specifically mentioned here today, and we can take the top comment that will end up, not in the live chat, but when the video is done, the top comment, and then we can pin it to the top, and so that way whenever someone comes into the video, the very first comment they'll see will be a list of some of the book recommendations. We'll put like 5 or 6 in there that come out of today's discussion, Jewish as well as Messianic Jewish sources, and people can grab those from there. Okay. And then one other thing we need to talk about, can we talk about this? Jeff, tell them about your role in this.
Oh, we're having an apologetics conference in the Valley. Doctrine for the Block. I'm going to be dealing with Old Testament law and some application to the believer. And we've got other cool stuff. And we have 2 secret out-of-town guests. I don't even know who they are. It's such a big secret that I'm not even aware. That's how big a secret it is. And so we're excited about doing this. And some of the other guests are named on the flyer. Now, I think I've been able to post that on my Facebook. But hopefully you'll get to see that around and see who some of the other folks are.
Yeah, and so Jeff will be speaking here. It's a second weekend of March 8th and 9th. And it's going to be his first time at an urban apologetics conference. And I told him, I told the folks who were going to come to the conference, I said, yeah, we got this guy. He's a Messianic Jewish guy, ethnically Jewish, loves Jesus as Messiah, yada, yada, yada. And he's going to talk about why, he isn't beholden to some kind of strict Sabbatarianism based upon sort of a Torah Talmudic Judaism. He's going to talk about why that's not necessary under the new covenant as far as that understanding of it. And they were like, that's cool, okay, because, there's some Seventh-day Adventism that creeps into a lot of Hispanic communities and stuff. And they said, but can you also talk about tattoos? And I looked around the room because half the people have a story in the background and they've got tattoos. And I said, well, can you make it Sabbath and tattoos? And Jeff said, okay, sure. So Sabbath and tattoos it is. And we're going to try to record it. We're still working out those details. We're going to do our darndest. And so definitely come to that. So that's one thing people need to know about.
Just the other thing I've been plugging is that, of course, we're going to have the Muslim Apologetics Conference. And that is coming up in March. I believe that's like the 22nd and 23rd with live outreach at the Arabic American Festival. And then also some mosque evangelism. Hey, look, you haven't lived to see a Jewish guy in front of a mosque sharing Jesus. So
that's right. Well, I guess I've lived because I've actually seen a little bit of that. And then I'm wearing this shirt. I want to tell everyone one last thing. I just got a message from Tony Ray from Hazakim, and I want to show you what he said. This is pretty cool. This is sort of a private message I'm sharing with you guys. Despite almost no marketing, the Billboard offices reached out to me yesterday requesting a copy of the Origins album cover art as the album, quote, may chart on Monday on Billboard. No guarantees, but they requested the cover art as it is a possibility. Today is the last day of the week to possibly help push it in that direction. Consider buying a copy of Origins today. Purchases made through both iTunes or wrathandgrace.com count towards sales. And so this is really cool because what he's saying is that if you guys buy Origins by Hazakim, that's a shirt I got for the album, and they're Messianic Jewish Christian hip hop artists who have a brand new album. You can watch the interview on my channel. If you get it today's the day, they could end up charting on Billboard this week. And so we are asking you to do that because the first week is kind of the make or break time. It's very rare if you don't do it in the first week that it happens later. So if you're thinking about getting it, get it. There's no guarantees, okay? It's just how these things go. But they're close enough that Billboard requested cover album art. Do you guys understand? You have to get it if you have not got it. Please do it now. Now is the time. So we want to support our brothers Hazakim, who I have played for Jeff numerous times in the car, as well as Modest Yahoo. It's a different story, though. But I think that's all I got, man. I'll let you close it out how you want, bro.
Okay, so appreciate Rabbi Asher, but the point is that the full canon, which includes the law, the prophets, and the writings, is authoritative, that the Torah is not just the Torah in Judaism, and that ultimately in these last days God speaks through Messiah, his son, who he appointed heir of all things. And when he had made purification for our sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high. And he is my Rebbe.
Amen. We're going to end here with the instrumental. It'll sound nice. We're just going to play a little music provided by Jonathan Soko. All right, we'll see you guys tomorrow during the premiere of a video I got going on. And be sure to check out Jeff Cran every Wednesday. Shalom, y'all.